Good morning, everyone. My name is Tina Singleton, and I am the Director of Programs at the YWCA Greater Charleston. We're really excited to have you here, and on behalf of the YWCA, our colleagues and partners who worked tirelessly with us on this presentation and making it happen, Tri-County Cradle to Career, E3, and Together SC. We're really happy you're here, and I think we're in for a really interesting morning. So what I'd like to do now is go over the agenda for the morning. We have the welcome and logistics, the purpose of the speaker series, which Audrey Lane will discuss. We have our main presentation about the Racial Disparities Report with Dr. Patricia Williams-Lassane and Mr. Darren Calhoun. We will have a breakout session after that where you all will go into small groups to work on some questions that Mr. Calhoun and Dr. Lassane have drawn up, and then you'll come back out and report on those. We will have today's call to action, and then Executive Director of YWCA, LaVonda Brown, will wrap it up with a what's next. So we welcome you all, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Audrey Lane. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us. So the anti-racism series that you are a part of, and you are the first participants in this series, really came out of a desire and an opportunity to really elevate the voices of individuals who are most impacted and who have the most experience with some of the things that we are experiencing in our society, especially as it pertains to racial disparities. So this is the first of many different sessions, and LaVonda will talk about our future sessions towards the end. But this session in particular really grounds us in the intersections of multiple areas that we see African Americans and some brown individuals experiencing, whether it's around health, whether it's education, criminal justice, and just being in an environment where you are not the primary recipient of the goodness of all that is. So this particular report is grounded in Charleston. I know we may have a few individuals who are not in the local area. However, you as an individual know, and we have seen throughout, especially this season, since COVID and this summer, that these disparities are very similar no matter where you are in this country. So we look forward to an engaging discussion with our two phenomenal facilitators today. So if you will oblige me to just give you some intel on who they are. So first we have Dr. Patricia Williams-Lassane, who many of us may know, who was in the Charleston community, was a vibrant member of our community, who was the former executive director of the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture at the College of Charleston. She taught anthropology, African American studies, and first year experience courses, and was a tenured faculty member in the library. She is a cultural anthropologist who has worked at the Field Museum and the Museum of Science and Industry in the Chicago area. I was about to say Chi-Town, Patricia. Okay. She holds a BA in English from Fisk University, a historically Black college and university. I know that was lifted last night in our first Black VP's speech, and you will continue to hear that. It's a historically Black college and university. A Master of Arts in Liberal Studies from Dartmouth, and a PhD in Anthropology from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Currently, she is the Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs and Associate Professor in Sociology at Morgan State University. That is Dr. Patricia Williams-Lassane. And then her co-pilot today is Mr. Darren Lee Calhoun II. So I was Googling about Darren. I just like to figure out, more about individuals that I don't know as much about. And Darren was quoted in the newspaper most recently. So if you recognize his last name, that the statue was named, that was a part of his lineage, Calhoun, but it needed to come down. So he is a historian on the history of African American higher education. He has various roles at the College of Charleston, and he and Dr. Hussein work together at the Avery Research Center, where he currently still is. And he has assisted with educational outreach and event planning, and serves as a producer and head researcher on a feature-length documentary film project with director Julie Dash. He is a community activist and involved in a variety of social justice organizations, and began his work with the Racial and Social Justice Initiative in May 2016. And their partnership together, and the reason why they are presenting this, is that they were both spearheading and facilitating the completion of the 2017 Charleston Racial Disparities Report. So they will walk us through their presentation shortly, but we just want to set some ground rules. One moment.
Oh, dropping the glasses.
All right. So one, I want to just talk about some tips. We wanted to make sure that you type your name and organization in the chat box. And please use the chat box for all general comments. And also, if you have a question, please put your name with your question in the chat box, and we'll be following those and tracking those all day or throughout the presentation. So ground rules. These ground rules, if you have taken the Racial Equity Institute class, Racial Equity Institute Phase 1 with the YWCA or somewhere else across the country, these ground rules will look familiar to you. So the first is we're going to get proximate to the problem, which is piggybacking on what I discussed around the relevance and the importance of these sessions. We're going to change the narrative. We need to understand what the current shared narrative is and be intimately aware of the narrative we all have internalized. Be willing to be uncomfortable, embracing one's own growing edge, and there is no quick fix. So we really, in order to get to systemic racism, we really are going to have to pull this apart. And then maintain hope in the face of the brutal facts, and commit and engage. So we know that 3 hours is a significant amount of your time, and we worked hard to capitalize on your time today, but this is important work, and there is no quick fix again. So we want you to, if you can, stay the whole time and stay in the moment. Stay present, alert, and awake. Participate appropriately and respectfully. Just trust the process, respect for all people, and maintain confidentiality, especially if you're in your breakouts, because we really want to move people to a place of vulnerability and being able to receive what needs to happen for all of us to succeed at the high levels. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hussein and Mr. Calhoun. Thank you for being with us.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lane. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank all of the organizers for thinking of both Darren and I for this opportunity to speak with you about the amazing work, the most important work that I've done to date. And I think some of the most important work to have come out of the College of Charleston and the Avery Research Center. While I no longer live in Charleston, it will always have a special place in my heart. And why shouldn't it? In terms of African-American history, it was the gateway to an uncertain future for enslaved Africans, one they didn't ask for, of course. And it would go on to be the home, although often an unwelcoming home to their offspring and their progeny who would be scattered throughout the country and the Caribbean, and who to this day, their descendants continue to fight for basic dignity and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In terms of American history, it is the place where, much of the great Southern culture was born, but also Southern wealth and prosperity flourished as a result of chattel slavery. And I would say that the war over American moral consciousness was fought and won or lost, depending upon where you fall on the topics of race, racism, and anti-racism, and racial equity in all sectors of society. I'm proud to have worked at the College of Charleston's Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture, and to have worked alongside my colleagues there, including Mr. Darren Calhoun. Darren was our graduate assistant, and then he was a consultant, and then he was hired, and he is not just my colleague, he is my bonus son, that's what I'm saying. And I continue to be inspired by the work that he is doing, and his leadership role in anti-racist advocacy there in Charleston and nationally. Through our work via RSJI, the Race and Social Justice Initiative, and their continued work, through the Avery Research Center, through partnerships with advocates in the community, such as the dynamic leaders who made this event possible today. And I really want to acknowledge the work of Ms. Lane, Ms. Vaughn, Ms. Singleton, Ms. Brown, Vaughn, Singleton, Lane. Okay, I got everybody. Because I was able to work with them, and the Research Center has been able to lead and work in tandem with other activists such as them. So when we started the work of RSJI, the city and the country were entering what, I really consider the nadir of race relations in the country. In 2015, we were seeing for the first time in a long time the seeds of fascism not only take root in this country, with the racist dog whistling of then presidential candidate Donald Trump, but right there in Charleston, we saw right before our eyes the footage of an unarmed Black man being shot and killed by a white police officer. And then a few months later, as you know, we all learned about the vicious racist attack at Mother Emanuel. And they were all evidence to us that there wasn't just a battle for the American conscience, but there was a brewing war for the nation's soul. At the same time, our research on racial disparities in Charleston County was proving what we already knew, that Black life in Charleston County continues to be stifled, policed, and marginalized by the hand of systemic racism, which is rooted in white supremacy. Now that was in 2015, and that report, which we will discuss today, spanned from 2000 to 2015, and it came out in 2016. And at that time, when the report was released, it revealed that the gap in earnings between Black and white Charlestonians was the same as it had been 50 years prior. Okay, so let that sit with you. Our slides today highlight many of the bleak findings of the report. And in 2016, many economists postulated that it would take African-American families 200 years to catch up to the wealth of their white counterparts. Even with the same or similar, and sometimes advanced credentials, Black people are still less likely to make the same as white counterparts, even today in 2020. Now, given that you have the data spanning 2000 to 2015, how do you think African Americans in Charleston County are faring today? While we're experiencing the twin diseases, the twin crises of the public health crises of COVID-19 and systemic racism. Of course, we know that, and systemic racism, which we are more likely, because we are more likely to work as essential workers and to have comorbidities, to have insufficient or lack of health insurance, to experience higher rates of evictions in places like none other than North Charleston. African Americans are twice as likely to be stopped by the police, are more likely to attend under-resourced public schools, suffer from food insecurities, housing insecurities, etc. So while we're discussing the report that came out in 2015, I really want you to think about and let resonate with you how all of those findings are now exacerbated, have been exacerbated by COVID-19. By now you have seen in the news that the numbers of African Americans who have contracted and succumbed to COVID-19 are astronomical. There is increasing evidence that some racial and ethnic minority groups, African Americans in particular, are being disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And inequities in social determinants of health, such as poverty and healthcare access, affecting these groups are interrelated. Again, it reflects what we found in our report. And they influence a wide range of health and quality of life outcomes and risks. So some of these factors include discrimination, healthcare access and utilization, occupation. We know that many working class and poor African Americans are essential workers working on the front lines, educational, income and wealth gaps, and housing. So here we are in 2020, just under a century ago, our nation was rocked by Red Summer 2019, when white rage, racial strife, and bigotry came to a boiling point and race riots broke out all across the country. That same year, ironically, the country was still struggling to get a hold of and pass the Spanish flu pandemic, which took the lives of many Americans and people globally. They say that history has a funny way, not so funny way, of repeating itself, because when we are discussing the unthinkable, dismantling systemic racism during a pandemic, which has already claimed almost 200,000 Americans, of which African Americans are one of the most vulnerable groups. Our predicament is further contextualized by the findings of the 1968 Kerner Commission report, which surprisingly, or not so surprisingly for some of us, revealed some of the factors that stymie Black life and upward mobility in the nation. And the fact that these same barriers prescribe Black life in the US in Charleston County today. In the same year that the Kerner report was published, which found that race riots, very similar to the recent civil unrest that we experienced, were a result of Black frustration at a lack of economic opportunity, and emphasized white racism was responsible for the rioting and rebellion by frustrated Black Americans. The report's most famous passage warned, quote, "Our nation is moving towards two societies, one Black, one white, separate and unequal." This summer, we have seen civil protests across the country in response to the killings of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, and pervasive state-sanctioned violence against Blacks in America. And indeed, Faulkner reminds us that, quote, "The past is never dead. It's not even the past." And so with that, I want to turn to the actual the racial disparities report itself. We were very fortunate to have a very generous benefactor in Google. And I actually think that Lylan Hester is on the call. I think I saw her. But right after, I mean, within days of the shooting at, oh, hey, Lylan, within days of the shooting of the mass shooting at Mother Emanuel, Google approached us to see what they could do, very similar to what we saw happening, this summer, right? After all of the civil unrest and after everyone saw the footage of both Ahmaud Arbery's murder and of course George Floyd, a lot of big businesses, corporate organizations and philanthropists said they wanted to do something. But I have to give lots of kudos and credit to Google, because what they allowed us to do, what they empowered us to do with their funding was not to have, as Darren puts it, performative inclusionism. We were able to do, or I would say performative diversity work. We were able to do substantive work at Avery through RSJI. And for me, the racial disparities report is really evidence of that. And so we partnered with our campus colleagues, the Addlestone Library, of which Avery is a part, the African American Studies Program, the Low Country Digital Humanities Initiative, and many, many, many community partners. So although the disparities report was, our baby, and we worked on it for a year and a half to really get it birthed, the fact that it was able to get in the hands of so many people was because so many of you and so many activists and philanthropists, like Linda Kettner, for example, who really stepped up and said, this is important. Let me help you get this in the hands of more people. So I have to just acknowledge our partners across the board. Next slide. So Darren, are you starting here or am I starting here?
I can, yeah, I'll take it from here.
Okay. And I'll round out at the end. I think it's important for, the folks who are at Avery to really talk about where the work is currently and how we got here. I'm so happy and so fortunate to have participated and, led the charge. But I do want to turn this over to Darren because he is a young activist. Go ahead, Darren.
Peace, everyone. Good morning. Like she said, my name is Darren Lee Calhoun II. I am the Facilities Outreach and Public Programming Coordinator at the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture. I also run the Race and Social Justice Initiative. And one thing we always have to talk about when we're looking at where the Race and Social Justice Initiative is today is Avery in the past. We can't, if you ever come to the Avery for a tour, if you ever want to talk about what's going on currently as far as disparities and inequities inside of Charleston, South Carolina, or in the world, you have to find out where they came from. So one thing at the Avery, we talk about the 1963 desegregation of the Charleston County Public Schools. We have to also talk about the current inequities of today. If we want to talk about the current labor movement today, we also have to talk about the 1969 hospital worker strikes that happened before. We always want to make that connection of everything that's going on, because everything has its roots. And that's what we try to do with the Race and Social Justice Initiative, as well as what we do at the Avery Research Center as far as our interpretation. Avery has a long history of social activism and social justice work. We're looking at the anti-lynching movement in the early 20th century, from looking at the 44 students who tried to integrate the College of Charleston, who actually pays my checks now, in 1947, but then the College of Charleston went to private to try to avoid integrating the schools. Those were Averyites. So with us taking on the Race and Social Justice Initiative, it was nothing new for us to continue this anti-racism work. It's just, it was just a continuation of the legacy of the shoulders of the people that we stood on. So as many of you know, because many of you have been to many of our programs, we do plenty of things throughout the community. We have large events. So over the last few years, we've had Marion Wright Edelman, the founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund. That event was in February 2016. We've had people such as Brian Stevenson, all of these great people who came to the College of Charleston, to the Charleston community, to speak about making a difference in the current injustices and how we can move forward from there. One of our biggest events, I'm sure most of you were at, was our Ta-Nehisi Coast event. It was crazy. At TD Arena, we brought Ta-Nehisi Coast and brought out over 2,500 people to listen to a lecture. That was almost unheard of in our current day and age. We put on national conferences, bringing down Dr. Lonnie Bunch for the Transforming World Public History Conference. This was an international conference for people coming from over 5 different countries. So in all of this work, that this conference particularly, we were looking at different interpretations and how we interpret, how we push the narrative of slavery throughout the transatlantic world. Over the last few years, another great event that we had would be bringing down Joy Reid, which feels like it was 5 years ago now because of the topic that we were talking about. But we were looking at the first year of the Trump administration, and Joy Reid came down to have an interdisciplinary conversation with our students as well as with our faculty, staff, and community. One thing we always do at the College of Charleston, if we're going to bring you in to have a big community talk, we're going to make sure we get some students down in front of you, be it high school students or be it college students at the College of Charleston or throughout some of the HBCUs in the area. You're always going to have to sit down and have that tough conversation because, as we know, our students and our young people are the ones that are pushing at the forefront of the movement right now. So they have to, anybody that we bring in, they will have to sit down and have that conversation with our students and our young activists out there. Now, although we do our major events, we also do smaller events. And these are some of our more impactful events. So if we look at, we brought St. Stephen's Elementary to the Avery Research Center for a History Social Justice Outreach project. We basically we put them through a history. We brought those 93rd graders down to do a history workshop throughout the entire building. We are now working to try to retrofit that to the age of COVID because I won't be around 93rd graders right now. However, wherever there's a will, there's a way. We have been working on our outreach and public programming through our digital means, and I'll talk about that more in a second. One of my favorite events one of my favorite outreach programs that we put on through the Race and Social Justice Initiative was when we took Starbucks over to Burke High School. We had 13 Starbucks partners sit down with with about 15 to 20 Burke High School students just to have a real conversation. Initially, it was supposed to be the big tour of the culinary arts facilities and the plant talks or whatnot. But what it ended up turning into was just a conversation between these partners and these Burke students. What they came to the conclusion was the Starbucks partners wanted to know why don't they ever come over to the Starbucks that was around the corner over on King and Calhoun. And some of the students basically said, we just didn't feel as if it was for us in their own community, in a space where where African Americans used to outnumber whites, but due to gentrification, they don't feel as if that space is for them anymore. So those Starbucks partners were able to take that away and start to understand and try to outreach to some of these other schools that have these historically Black high schools and schools in Charleston County to make that connection with them, and show them that this community is yours and you are a stakeholder within the community. Again, we brought people such as we brought the author of The Hate You Give and did a virtual film screening with her. But one of our biggest accomplishments alongside of the Racial Disparities Report will be our Student Leadership Awards. They are Social Justice Leadership Awards named in honor of the great James E. Campbell, who just turned 95 a few days ago, back on July 31st. Mr. Campbell, if any of you have met him, he is a true longtime scholar, activist, educator. His family were a long time, his mother, grandmother, aunts, uncles, all graduated from the Avery when we were a school back from between 1865 and 1954. And everyone knows he loves dialectical materialism. Yeah. Mr. Campbell is a true scholar, and it was on a true activist, and it was only right for us to name our Student Leadership Awards after him. Now, our Student Leadership Awards is a scholarship, is a grant opportunity that we give to that we offer to 10 different students over the course of a school year. The students receive funding to complete any social justice project that they have going on that they need funding to. Now, with this, we're not just giving them the money and say, go ahead and do whatever you need. They have to go through a grant writing process. So we also teaching them how to get ready to write grants while they're still inside of college. So they complete the application, write the grant, go through an interview process, and then be selected to become a J. Campbell Scholar. This year we were fortunate to receive an anonymous donation that allowed us to expand our James E. Campbell Scholars to our James E. Campbell Scholars to the HBCUs across the state of South Carolina. So now we offer five scholarships to the students at the College of Charleston, and then five at large to any HBCU student across the state of South Carolina. We have also talked about race and social justice in multiple places across the world. We went to Germany at the Centropa Summer Academy to present about RSJI, as well as down in Johannesburg and Cape Town, South Africa. So one thing that we've been seeing is that this work that we're doing down in Charleston resonates across the entire globe. If something happens in Charleston, it's bound to happen anywhere else. And so when we start looking at the disparities and inequities, you're going to start seeing, okay, well, if I live in Boston, Massachusetts, well, it's starting to happen the same exact thing. Some of the same exact things are happening there. No matter what part of America or what part of the world you're in, if it's happening in Charleston, it's bound to be happening somewhere else. All right, so as I said, we partner with so many people. We we have higher education outreach. We're engaged inside of the community with food giveaways or whatnot. But one of my favorite trips I wanted to definitely highlight was the Spirit of South Carolina Black Maritime trip that we did. I was previously on the constituent 10 district board, District 10 board for the Charleston County School District. And one thing that I noticed is that we were, as we'll see when we go through the report, we were disciplining students at a terrible rate. We were sending students to Daniel Jenkins and Liberty Hill for no reason that they didn't need to go up there. So with me joining that board, it enabled me to start looking at some different disciplinary measures. There were students who I felt needed a second chance to be inside of the classroom. They just needed different outlets. So from now last summer, we ended up taking a trip of about 9 to 10 students over on a 4-day boat trip on the Spirit of South Carolina Schoner boat and on the Ashley. Now, due to weather problems and everything else that happened, we ended up only taking the boat out on the water about 2 or 3 days. However, the students learned so much, and we were able to teach them about resistance and rebellion and through black waterways through this trip. Now, 4 of those students that were on that trip actually came in front of my board, and it was contingent upon them finishing this trip and for them to, for that trip, for the disciplinary measures to be changed in a bit. So instead of being sent to Daniel Jenkins or Liberty Hill or expelled from their school, they were able to go to the TPA or return back to school with supervision. However, they had to also attend this trip. So we're trying to find ways to divert them having to suspend students or expel students through the work that we've been doing through race and social justice initiatives, as well as my work through the Charleston County School District D10 board. So as I said, because of COVID, we had to go digital. The Avery went digital, completely digital. We will not open our doors until it is safe for our community to do so, to be there. It just will not happen. We've been getting calls to try to get us to open back up, but it's not safe for our community to be there. So what we've done to keep people engaged was to open the Avery Digital Classroom. Now through this, we've hosted, we hosted documentaries. We brought in major speakers again, but also another important thing that we've been doing was holding town halls to talk about certain current injustices, be it with the West Edge project, the back of the Green in Gadsden's Creek, be it talking about the taking down of the Calhoun Statue, which finally happened. The man owned my family for a long time, so I'm proud of that. We had a whole series looking at LGBTQ plus in May in town halls, and them amplifying their voices and things that people inside the community haven't been able to do, who felt they haven't been heard. So through the Race and Social Justice Initiative, we are able to amplify different voices of community organizations, as well as activists and organizers that surround us. Now, we do all these great things, but we all know one of the best things to come out of the Race and Social Justice Initiative is the State of Racial Disparities in Charleston County, South Carolina, 2000 to 2015. The disparities report was a labor of love. The disparities report was released in November 2017. And before I turn it back over to Dr. Hussein, I will say when we released this report on November 2017, initially it was supposed to come out in October, and then before that it was supposed to come out in September. September 2017, we received some more documents after a FOIA request that we put in 6 months ago, so we had to push it back. October, there was some editing taking place, and people wanted to take a look over it, but it was still going to be released. November, we had 3 graduate students and 2 undergraduate students, and this is very important when we start looking at the inequities and the reception to. I'm going to get back to the reception. Later on, I'll get to the reception of the disparities report. November, I think it was November 7th, 2017. That's the day we released it. That was the day that Henry McMaster was in Charleston speaking for Steve Bannon over at the Citadel. Every elected official who represents Charleston was called and harassed to come to this release. We had 3. When I say every municipality, that's all the way down from Maguette up to Isle of Palms, up to Allendale, McClennanville. Anybody who's an elected official who represents the city or county of Charleston was invited to come be at this report release. And also, when we did this, I won't say we purposely, it just so happened to be the weekend that Henry McMaster was supposed to be here. McMaster's office told us that he was leaving for a lunch. McMaster's office told us that he had to get back to Columbia after his talk at 8 o'clock that morning at the Citadel. And Mayor Tecklenburg, if I remember correctly, ended up having lunch with him later that day, although he told us that he would be going back up to Columbia. Just gonna put that out there. But like I said, we invited every elected official. 3 showed up. I know Tecklenburg was there. A few, 1 or 2 councilmen, as well as somebody from the school board showed up as well. People, when we released this report, it's taken 3 years for everything to. It's taken 3 years for people to really take hold of it and actually start making a move on it. The numbers will really tell you why, and I'm going to turn it right back over to Dr. Hussein to talk about some of the findings that we had.
So, yes, so thank you, Darren. I think it was important for you all to hear what Avery through RSJI is doing to address, to highlight some of the issues that we are discussing today, because they're all part and parcel of this larger issue of racial disparities. And I have to tell you, Darren is correct. It was definitely a labor of love to birth this baby. And these young millennials, I'm telling you, they are fearless and, put some of us older revolutionaries to shame, because he literally just called out the governor. But okay, all right, Darren, I see you. So what the findings of the racial disparities report, before I get into those findings, I do want to echo what Darren said, that, it's taken 3 years, which I don't understand how it has taken 3 years for people to read the disparities report. I have a really great sister friend who told me that she is on a racial inclusion, diversity and inclusion parent board for an elite private school in Charleston, who said that, oh my God, I'm on this board and I mentioned the racial disparities report and nobody had seen it. Well, the irony is that one of my children went to that school, so it blows my mind that they could say they hadn't heard of the disparities report. So, but back to the findings. So Black people in Charleston County as of 2015 were earning 60% of what their white counterparts were making. That economic gulf between Black and whites, again, was present 50 years prior and had not disappeared. That is just outlandish and outrageous. Again, I want you to think about, where do you think this gap is right now, given COVID, given unemployment rates, et cetera, et cetera. Of more than 22,000 traffic stops in 2014, North Charleston in North Charleston that did not result in a citation or arrest, 16,000 some odd involved African Americans, almost 76% of those stops. So, and over 10,000 of those involve Black men. So again, this data reflects what was happening from 2000 and 2015, but we've seen this very summer how policing of Black bodies by law enforcement agents and also by vigilante white supremacists negatively impact and prescribe Black life in this country, prescribes Black life in North Charleston specifically. Black students are disproportionately stuck in low-performing, under-resourced schools. Again, let us contextualize all of this given our current COVID milieu, right? So what does that mean when our students are dealing with the digital divide? What does it mean when our students who are in under-resourced schools are now having to do school work remotely? But I can't remember, are Charleston, South Carolina schools in school or not in school? But if they are doing remote learning, then, well, we know they did remote learning at the end of the spring. So that digital divide, that food insecurity, those issues were only exacerbated by this current COVID climate. The Black population experiences greater poverty than other racial and ethnic groups in Charleston County. 42% of Black children under the age of 18 are living below the poverty line compared to 11% of white children. Now, the numbers for Black children and white children living below the poverty line in Charleston County are just embarrassing and ridiculous given the wealth of this nation. Next slide, please. So census data in 1990 showed that the city's Black population stood at 41%. But gentrification and rising costs of living, along with the sharp increase of young white professionals seeking an urban lifestyle in a southern town, has displaced African Americans off the peninsula and transformed the downtown area into a majority white city in the first time in 60 years. Now, of course, this phenomenon is not unique to the peninsula, right? We see this happening all across the nation. Again, I want you to think about what are the systemic practices that are in place, that are currently in place, that make Black home ownership more vulnerable in places like the city of Charleston, up in, these places where everyone want to live, these, cool southern, gentrifying areas. What are the issues? What are the factors that make home ownership and or the ability to rent in those areas impossible for Black people, but feasible and easy for white people? Next slide. Oh, sorry. And then also in terms of policing, in North Charleston, at the time of this report, 62 of the 342 police officers were Black, and 27 of the county sheriffs, 253 deputies were Black, and 12 of the Mount Pleasant 138 officers were Black. Now, why is this significant? Why is this important? Well, regardless of where you fall on the discourse on dismantling police nationwide, you have to see that having Black communities being policed predominantly by white police officers in a situation, in a time where white supremacy and racism are still very much real life experiences for Black people, is problematic. Also, given the fact that our modern policing systems are rooted in the history of the legacy of slavery. So there's a lot of unpacking to do in terms of where we go in this nation, but also in places like Charleston and Charleston County, in examining and really unpacking the place of policing and how it impacts Black life. I have to tell you, as a mother of a Black son living in Charleston, and now as a mother of a Black son who was here with me in the city of Baltimore, now downtown Baltimore in the Inner Harbor, I had the same fears for his life with him skateboarding around here as I felt for him in Charleston in some instances. And so why is that Black parents are still having the conversations with their children that my parents, who were sharecroppers, who moved from the South to the North, whose parents had talked to them about, being safe and, not agitating white folks or the police? Why are we still having those same sorts of conversations? Why are our children's lives still vulnerable, and we're living in these precarious situations in terms of rearing Black children in this country, whether it is downtown on the peninsula, whether it is in Mount Pleasant, or if it's in North Charleston, or here in Baltimore. So where are we, and why are we here? Quite frankly, there is quite a bit of unfinished business that needs to be tended to, not just in Charleston County, again, but nationwide. In 2015, I was saying, this has to be the nadir of race relations in this country. I was wrong. This is clearly the nadir of race relations, and this is, it's just mind-blowing. And so as recent as the 1968 Kerner Commission report, which again just reflects, provides context for the findings of the RSJI report, this says to us, we have a Black eye, and we need to tend to it. We need to figure this out if we are going to live up to the precepts that our forebears laid out for us. Systemic racism is part and parcel of this nation's fabric, and so we are going to have to do the work, and white people are going to have to take the charge to be self-reflective, to look inward, to call themselves out on the carpet, to, as Ms. Audrey Lane said, to get proximate to the problem, to understand how systemic racism acts in nefarious ways from both the banal to the blatant. To recognize and to be honest with ourselves, and understand that systemic racism is woven into the tapestry of the collective American psyche. And while, again, anti-racism work must be undertaken by all Americans, I have said this from the beginning, and I will continue to say this, that white people must be the bulwark of change to undo systemic racism, from which they all benefit. And so that is why we're here. We're here because you all love Charleston. We're here because the organizers of this panel, Love Charleston, and they know that this work has to be done hand in hand. They want you to take this report, to read it and to be convicted by it, and to look at life differently than you have done before, to be introspective. And I have to say, as someone who's no longer at the College of Charleston, but again, Avery and the college mean a lot to me. If there are philanthropists on this call, you all need to be funding Avery to do another racial disparities report, especially given the moment that we're in with COVID, and given that this is a unique and life-changing year that we are in. You know, November is right around the corner, and you know, the country can look, let's hope the country looks very differently come January, but we don't know. And so either way, if it goes one way or the other way, these deep-rooted problems are going to take persistent, you know, in the trenches, microscopic, you know, attention to these issues. And so, again, my charge is, you know, to those philanthropists, dig deep and give to Avery, and also to give to the other organizations who work to put this this panel together. And that's all that I have. Darren, do you want to wrap up?
And so one thing that we always want to talk about, yes, there are things that are moving right now. People have been making some changes, but you know, we always have to keep pushing ourselves to do more. There are some efforts going on with local municipalities and organizations, be it the hiring of Amber Johnson, who I've seen on the call as the Diversity, Race, and Racial Reconciliation and Tolerance Manager. You know, Charleston County, they commissioned the creation of a specialized dashboard to assess that.
Darren, before you move on from Ms. Amber, who I haven't met, so I want to go on the record to say, I don't know if your division has a budget yet, Ms. Johnson, but you need a budget. And if the mayor is on the call, Amber Johnson needs a budget. Because the word on the street, since I don't live in Charleston anymore, I can say this. The word on the street is that Ms. Johnson does not have a budget. So how can you really expect work around diversity, racial reconciliation, and tolerance to be done without a budget? So I think that all of you all who are on this call need to make a call, send an email to John and say, look, you have had the report for years now. You said to Dr. Hussein that you were going to do X, Y, and Z. You did hire Ms. Johnson, but now you have to equip her with what she needs to do the work that she's supposed to do. Because if not, this is just another example of performative inclusionism. And we know our mayor doesn't want to do that. So your mayor, not my mayor.
Exactly. I was just going to get to that. One thing, when we start looking at these current efforts, we also have to back them up with the money. You know, you have to back it up with money. You have to back it up with true action, or we're going to have something that we call performative inclusionism. That's when you just bring somebody to the table and then show them off as if they're just your black. That's what we don't want to happen. If people are truly interested in true long-term systemic change, we need to take those small efforts that are going on and equip them with the resources to make this work actually happen. When you start looking at your the table that you built, or the table that you're sitting at, how many people of color, how many people are included who actually have a true voice to make decisions? When you look around, does it look just like you? Those are the problems that we're talking about. And we also know that, well, although people are moving in the right directions, some things fall short of hitting the true goal. We also need those community voices to come in and actually listen to it. when I listened to them, when I was doing my undergraduate thesis in Atlanta, the first thing my professor told me was, you can't just go out, you just can't come inside this office and tell me what the community needs. You need to go to the office and I have them tell you what they need to be able to come back in here to tell me what they need. If I'm somebody coming from Detroit and Atlanta saying the West End needs this, I need to be out in the West End talking to the people in the West End to find out what they need and what they want me to be able to help them with. And then bring their voices into the table, bring their voices to the table to help push everything through as well. It's the same as that. It's the same as that concept when we're looking at anti-racism training, as well as anti-racist training, as well as inequity and disparities within Charleston. Now, I also wanted to mention two other things with the. One thing when we did this report, one thing we did notice again, and it wasn't something that we didn't know was. It wasn't something that we didn't understand in the beginning. It's just we saw it on paper at this point. All the disparities and inequities are interrelated. When you talk about one thing, you're going to have to talk about the other. If you see something, if we're talking about the educational disparities and inequities inside of Charleston County School District, we also see that link to gentrification. When we see the gentrification, we see that link to food and health disparities. When we look at food and health disparities, we start looking at income disparities. And then, of course, when we got income disparities, it's bound to be followed by that one disparity of policing disparities. Everything is interrelated. You can't take one without talking about the other. So, especially within this age of COVID right now, one thing that we're noticing is that, we hear the excuse, well, not the excuse, but we hear people say, well, the students need to go inside the schools because this is where they get their food. This is where they are safe from harm during the day, well, whatever. However, yes, that is true, but we also know we're living inside of a global pandemic. But the true problem, particularly when we start looking at the technology gap, the true problem that we have to get at is start pulling back the onion and to find out why do we have these true inequities here. Because once we start pulling back that onion, then we're going to notice that we're going to need a lot of resources to try to fix it. Why do those students have food inequities inside of their households? Why are these students? Why is there such a big technology gap? Once we start pulling that back, and then we start trying to tackle the root causes for it, then we can start. Then we wouldn't have to worry about whether a student is starving at home or able to even connect to the internet while they're at home during this global pandemic. So it's really going to take the resources from the higher ups and the different municipalities to try to tackle the root causes of these inequities, so we can have a equitable society. That's exactly what we get to next. How do we get to a place of racial equity? Local Black Charleston activists should take the lead in drafting a racial equity framework. Every sector of life, housing, employment, education, wages, zoning, and philanthropic leadership must be evaluated using a racial equity lens. I'm tossing back to Dr. Hussein to break this down just a little bit more as far as using a racial equity lens and using a racial equity framework, because it's going to come together when we do our breakout session in a few minutes.
Sure, yes. So using a racial equity lens is a concept that actually was utilized very early on in philanthropy, which of course we know that the focus of philanthropy is to make society better. And so historically, some of the practices of big foundations and small family foundations were sort of a focus on social services and the arts, which are important, but there was not a focus on advocacy and policy. And so a racial equity lens means that you are really the methodological framework for looking at society's issues uses racial equity as its foundation. So how does looking at education, how do you see education functioning equally and successfully for all children. So that means looking at how and why some schools are funded at higher rates than other schools, and what exactly contributes to inequity in those sectors. And then, of course, when you are trying to envision a new world, a new society, then you also look at it using a racial equity framework so that whatever systems you are hoping to replace or whatever policies you're hoping to establish are those that have a focus on racial equity. And this isn't just about, you know, equality, everybody getting the same amount across the board. I'm sure you all have seen those. There are a lot of different cartoon animated images or graphics where, you know, there are people who are trying to look over a fence. So the fence is that barrier, right? And so the equality would give everybody the same sort of, you know, step stool. But of course, that won't help create a racially equitable situation. I mean, everyone still won't be able to see over that fence. And so that means that some people in society will get more support, some will get a little bit more, and some will get less based upon, you know, where they fall in society. But ultimately, the goal of racial equity is to make sure that everyone has a level chance at, you know, those rights, those inalienable rights that we stand on in our country, right? I want to give you just an example of how, you know, inequities in higher ed and education really stymie African Americans. So in many instances, African Americans and our white counterparts will have the same you know, credentials, we've gone to similar schools, et cetera, but in many instances where African Americans, some Pell Grant recipients, having to take out student loans because their parents don't have equity in their homes because of where their homes are, their homes never appreciated, et cetera, or that maybe they were, you know, were victims of predatory loans, so they have high interest rates, so their parents were not able to really help them with their college education. And then you will have white college students who, whose parents either could help them with college, or even if they didn't help them with college and they did take out student loans, those student loans and that baggage still does not impede them from getting, you know, better jobs and or moving into areas with better zip codes, better schools, et cetera. And so let's just say two African Americans start the same job, they have the same credentials, but the one new employee has $60,000 in student loans and the white employee has zero, or let's say maybe $5,000 or $10,000 in student loans. Uh-oh, sorry. Still on?
Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah, you good.
I'm sorry. Somehow the phone started ringing while I was in the, anyway, through my phone. So there is, the two of them are never going to be on equal footing in that regards, because the African American employee is always going to be behind his or her white counterpart. And I bring up the student loan piece because, you know, there's been a lot of conversation you know, in the media with politicians about the student loan debt in this country. But that student loan debt and that example is a great example of just how hard it is for African Americans, even when we are girded with really good educations, to catch up to that of our counterparts. So this is why looking at the issues in front of us and also addressing those issues through a racial equity framework are important.
And that is me. So as everyone knows, when we put out this report, we were going to tell everything. We talked about all of the inequities and disparities. However, we did put forward policy recommendations. We said we're going to tell you everything that's wrong with Charleston County and the city of Charleston and all the other municipalities, but we are also going to give you things that you can put forward and that organizations and municipalities, anybody who wants to try to advance this work can put forward to make this, to start trying to bring racial equity into this place that we live. I'm happy to say there's some work that has been going on through you know, City of Charleston, County of Charleston, also other organizations putting together work, but there needs to be a more concerted effort through any organization to start making this community place that we want it to be. One that I'm particularly keen on is starting 529 accounts for students who are doing working, and that's over the summer. That's something that can easily be tackled by organization, you know, by organization matching students who are working, say, for instance, the Rose kids downtown. You know, we talk about them all the time. We talk about them being police. We talk about this, you know, them not being regular with whatnot. Well, how about you making an apprenticeship program to where you have the older kids running the program, teaching the younger ones how to do it. So we're still keeping that same culture along, moving along through the generations. But then also incentivizing it with giving them 529 accounts. So when they do turn 18, they are able to graduate and have money waiting for them, which I know I didn't have growing up in Detroit. When I graduated from high school, I didn't have anything waiting for me except for a big old loan, like Dr. Hussein just said. You know, there's small things like that, you know, assessing and doing complete audits of your organization. Seeing who has true powers inside of your, who has true powers sitting at the table. Is there only one Black person sitting at the table? A few weeks ago, there was a horrible tragedy down on King Street, and, you know, there were some reports coming out from different local leaders saying that they were going to militarize the east side of Charleston. One of the people who put those reports out said, well, if I would have had a Black person inside the room, that report, release wouldn't have come out like that. Well, that's twofold. One, you're already talking about militarizing the east side that had nothing to do with the tragedy that happened on King Street. Also, why do you need a Black person inside the room to know that what you said was fanning the flame and was a dog whistle? There's a problem inherently in everything that's going on. So what do we do to try to rectify them? Let's start looking at things from a racial equity framework, through a racial equity lens, and putting in these different recommendations. We're not saying at all you just need to take everything that we're doing and add it in, but you know, find out how you can make your organization work. And make it equitable for everyone. And also, you know, see if your organization reflects the community it's trying to serve. Oftentimes we go to people and tell them what they need. I said that earlier, but how does your community makeup, does your organizational makeup reflect the community that you are serving? We oftentimes go to the poor, go to the disenfranchised, go to everyone and say, this is how you make your life better, but never truly offer the resources or the opportunities to let them get better, to help them, establish them to get better. So that being said, I think we're going to get the question and answers first, but we are going to get to our breakout sessions, and we're going to do exactly that. We're going to all assess our own organizations and see if our organizations are actually using racial equity framework or racial equity lens to reflect with the city of Charleston, with the county of Charleston, what we all supposed to be doing, what we all hope to be doing. So we're going to get to the breakout session. I think we're going to do question and answers first. But thank you again for allowing us to be here. You can always reach me at the Avery, as many of you know. However, I will say in a couple months I won't be here because I'll be on paternity leave. So it's crazy. It's still crazy saying that, but yeah, y'all can always reach me at the Avery, and I'm sure you can get in contact with Dr. Hussein as well, and we can help out in any way that we can. Yes.
Great. So thank you, Dr. Hussein and Mr. Calhoun. Information has been coming in, and I would just say to everyone, if you have questions, please continue to add them to the chat, but we'll get started. One moment. So one question that came up on one of your earlier slides, I think, Mr. Calhoun, you were speaking. What does blacklist mean?
Oh, great question. And throughout the 1960s, there was a Charleston movement, the Charleston movement, which were blacklisting stores on King Street who weren't going to hire African Americans. Don't buy where you can't work. So throughout the entire Charleston movement, that was one of the biggest things of boycotting some of the stores boycotting the stores where they weren't allowed to come in through the front door, where they weren't allowed to work. And that was one of the strategies coming out of the civil rights movement in Charleston. As you can see on the bottom right-hand corner there, you can't really see, and I don't think I have the picture of Minerva on there, and I don't know if Minerva's on the call, but she was part of that movement, Minerva King. She was a part of that movement of, the sit-ins on King Street, and that's one not very much talked about the history of civil rights activism inside of Charleston. We had some major boycotts and some major activism coming off of King Street, and through the students and through the local leaders and schools out in Charleston. Avery was a part of that. Many of the people who were leading the civil rights movements in Charleston, be it Septima Clark, J. Arthur Brown, J. Arthur Brown's daughters, Minerva and Millicent Brown, they were leading this movement, and they were also Avery. So when we talk about Avery and Avery and the history of social change and social justice activism, like I said before, this runs deep inside of our veins, and it runs deep inside of the roots and the foundation that the Avery stands on at 125 Bush Street.
Great, I appreciate that. Any thoughts on why North Charleston has the highest eviction rate in the country? Is it pro-landlord laws, ownership structure, rental properties? What is so different about North Charleston?
Want me to take that? All right. If we really want to talk about ownership in North Charleston, I think it is though. It first starts with the city. We also have to look at when we have so many people leaving off of the peninsula, leaving out of Charleston, being gentrified and being pushed out of the places where they have. A lot of people are going up there to rent. A lot of people. Then we also have like I said before, everything is interrelated. So when you're looking at the people who are leaving the city of Charleston where they can walk to work, now they have to go up to North Charleston or to Lasson or Somerville or whatnot, and then they have to bus back in. Now we have transportation inequities or whatnot. So everything, like I said, everything is interrelated. But when we start looking at the housing crisis, they can't make it to work downtown because we don't have great downtown or some of these other municipalities. And excuse me, because they because they have the lack of transportation. How are they able to be upwardly mobile within their organization or within their cities to be able to get better pay, to be able to catch up on those bills, to be able to address some of those current inequities that they have inside of the system? I also want to say that we do need help from the city of North Charleston of helping African Americans own land up there. There are instances where people are trying to buy land from the city and they just won't sell it to them. They want it to go through third parties, but those are things that we truly need to start looking at. How is the city of North Charleston incentivizing African Americans to buy land, own land, to be able to keep it and gain that equity and that the appreciation of value to pass down to generations. In order to truly be in this space of working of enabling people to be the best that they can be, you have to be intentional. We can't just say we want to do it. You have to be intentional about the things that you're trying to make changes on. And intentionality means you have to put resources behind it, or else you're just saying it. It's just goes back to that performative inclusionism. You're just saying it. So being able to put resources and being intentional about what you're trying to do goes a long way. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that this is a great example. This topic is a very great example of how education, income, transportation, all of these issues are so interwoven in terms of how one impacts, another, right? So Darren just gave you a very complicated, a very nuanced look at how each one of those impacts one another. And so if you are a working class person who is living, far out in North Charleston and, not really making a living wage, and juggling all of the responsibilities that all of us are responsible for, and not being able to make ends meet, then something is going to give, and often it is housing, because people don't have the money to pay rent. And under the Trump administration, and with Dr. Ben Carson's leadership, rental properties, the rates of people who are getting subsidized housing has gone up somewhat, upwards of, I think, 28%. And North Charleston, I think, was one of the places in the country where rent went up the most. Oh, I see Madeline put in there the highest in the country. I think that's accurate. And so, of course, you are going to have people who are being evicted. So there's also, it's twofold. People are being evicted because they can't pay the rent. People are losing their homes because the taxes are going up, because really cool pedestrian livable places like parks, the new developments in Park Circle are coming up. And so whereas hipsters are able to move into North Charleston and live in cool areas, Black homeowners who've been there for generations are now vulnerable because they can potentially lose their homes. If there are renters, then people who are renting out apartments or their homes to renters, then also become vulnerable when their renters can't pay. So it's really a very, very complicated, it's not really complicated, we know what it is, but it's very nuanced. And yeah, we're going to see, sadly, more evictions given the unemployment rates that our country is experiencing. And of course, Congress went to recess and we don't have a stimulus bill passed, unless that happened last night, I don't know. So there you have it.
Got it. One term that we've talked about multiple times is performative inclusion. So can we get Mr. Calhoun, can you enlighten us on what that term means?
Yes, absolutely. Over the last year and a half, I've been asked to serve on, I'll say at least 10 different committees, because the organizations wanted to begin the process of looking at anti-racist training. They wanted to bring more diversity and inclusion into their rooms, into their spaces, on their boards. But then oftentimes I find myself being the only one there, and also I'm being the only Black person there. Also finding myself not having any type of true power, or even my voice being stymied and not appreciated while I'm there.
Mm-hmm.
When you see,
Yeah.
when you see things like that, it's straight up performative. You only want to say that you have a Black person in your room, and they always want to toss you out there and say, well, look, we're partnering with the Avery Research Center. How are we truly partners if our voices aren't being heard at the table? One thing that we're doing under, especially that we started up under Dr. Hussein with our new director at the Avery, we're going to evaluate all of our partners that we have, because a lot of organizations and a lot of departments, a lot of places around the city, whatnot, they want to say that they have the Avery on their side. So just in case they get tossed inside of hot water, they can say, but look, we have the Avery. You're not really included inside of that conversation.
Yeah.
We're not really being included inside of decision makings that affect our community.
Mm-hmm.
We're not being included on the even when we get down to it, we're not being included on the financial side. Mm-hmm. So they use our name, they use my face as a Black man and a Black a vocal Black activist organizer out here to get grant funding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also I think in terms of corporations and board representation, higher ed across the board, we are seeing a lot of hiring around diversity and inclusion or equity, professionals, right? I get countless job opportunities for these particular jobs. And often those jobs are essentially bean counting jobs, right? They're checking off that, we have X amount of Latinx, X amount of Black people, whatever, or these are the positions that put on the annual Black History Month programs, or these are the ones who go out and do the community engagement. So when you continue to see, Black people tap to do jobs like community engagement or, diverse, it's usually a telltale sign that an organization is, doing some performative inclusionism, unless you really see some systemic change. And so that is pervasive. And again, to Darren's point, that oftentimes Black folks are asked to serve on committees and to or hired for certain jobs because there's the perception that you're the right type of Black person who's going to echo the same sentiments of those who are in power at said organization or corporation, right? And so the diversity of thought in terms of Black people who are at the table, especially in Charleston, lacks because, they're always tapping the same people. And in the 10 years that I was in Charleston, until many of the young activists, like Darren and some others, it was the same like baby boomers who were at the table for everything. And so if you have the same type of Black person, with the same, sort of worldview, or who have, you're going to have, continue to have the same type of performative inclusionism. I see it in hiring a lot. And so I think we need to be very, discerning about that, and really organizations who really want to do the work need to be open to have some radical Black thought leaders at the table. Really, you have to have some radical thought leaders at the table. And I tell you that I used to think I was radical, but these millennials and Gen Zers have shown me that and my children have told me, you know, I need to step up my radical activity. So my point is, we need to be very thoughtful and discerning about all of that. And the last point I want to make was when Darren spoke about, you know, being brought to the table, you know, and you really, like, you're looking around and like, what just happened, right? And so I will say, right before I left the Charleston, I was asked to be on 2 big celebratory committees, and I'll let you all decide what those celebratory committees were, what they were celebrating. And so I'd go to these meetings, and, you know, they'd ask for our ideas and and then the next thing happened, they brought in some, you know, white speakers, and like, I was like, what am I doing? You completely discounted everything that we were saying. And you know, I had to exit. It was, you know, I had to exit 2 of those, you know, both of those committees, because I just couldn't do it anymore. You know, sometimes you just can't do it anymore. So I don't know. I just rambled. I apologize.
So one of the things that I think is, and if you can decipher this, on the strand of performative inclusionary practices, what about the statements from organizations and or a Black Lives Matter plaza, and for some even, you know, the taking down of the Calhoun statue?
Well, I'm gonna I'm just gonna say my piece. You know, first of all, I didn't think that the Calhoun statue was gonna come down, but then when it did come down, I just didn't feel a certain, I actually felt a certain ennui, because I felt like, you know, folks are going to be lulled into this idea that you know, progress is really being made. And so, like, in terms of not having to see the statue, yeah, but to know that the culture that supported that legacy has not been dismantled in Charleston, that still remains. And so the Black Lives Matter statements and this and that, and, you know, all of industry across the board, you know, and this country, you know, who said, you know, Uber Eats, they even have a statement when you are on Uber Eats, like, we support Black Lives Matter. I'm like, really? What does that mean exactly? And so, you know, I haven't seen where anything has happened as yet. Now, this is, you know, we're still in summertime. It's not fall yet, but I just am like, to quote James Baldwin, you know, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. You know, it's like that old smoke and mirrors. So I don't know, but that could just, you know, I don't know.
Well, I say, as far as the Calhoun statue, it was mentioned, I think I said he also, John C. Calhoun owned my family. The earliest person that I know of, his name was Cradle in 1838, up in Calhoun Falls, South Carolina. And I'm sure some of you seen the report a couple of days ago when they found, when Clemson archaeologists found the descendant bones of the John C. Calhoun enslaved people. I'm willing and able, if anybody from Clemson is on here, I'm willing and able to go ahead and take that DNA test, because I'm sure you will find many of my relatives up there. So when they were taking down that statue, I was out there at 11, about 10, I got there around 10 o'clock, 10:30, and left about 1:30, 2 o'clock that morning, because I just knew it was going to be a quick and easy knockdown, being able to take it down. The next day, I'm sure some of you seen it take a couple of days to take that statue down. From the Avery's Twitter page, we basically said, well, it just shows a symbolism of how deeply entrenched racism and racism is inside of the city of Charleston, inside of this country, because it took that man so long and he was so held on so tight that not trying to come that, you know, that's how deeply entrenched this racist ideology and this racist society that we are in, that they had to get a diamond cutter, one of the cutters in the world, to cut it down. And they had to be very intentional on how they cut it down. So that's very symbolic of what we have to do inside of the city of Charleston County, of Charleston, and within this nation writ large. We have to be very intentional on how we're going to cut down this statue and this statue of racism that we have. And also, we're still going to have that base sitting there for a long time. We got to find out what we're going to do with this base and eventually cut that thing down too. But when we start talking about, you know, the different statements, we see how long it took for the racial disparities report to take off. It took 3 years. Again, you know, everybody making their statements. You got Sony making a statement saying we're looking to donate $4 million here. You got Nike saying they're going to donate this here. We got all these places saying they're going to donate the money to these different organizations and whatnot. But I would want to follow up in January to find out, where did that $4 million go? Who did it go to? Did they just, did they actually even give it out? Because many people, as we saw on King Street, many people were just tossing Black Lives Matter up on their windows so they wouldn't get broken. Mm. That's performative right there. Them people that I've seen, a few stores that I had to stop them from calling the police on some kids just for being in there, having Black Lives Matter up on their window. And when I walked past, I was like, that's not how you truly feel. You just don't want your window broken. That's performative right there. That's the performative inclusionary measures that we need to knock down, and people need to be called out on. Right. All these companies need to be called out if we look in January and see that they did not give any money away to these different organizations who are actually on the ground doing the work. So,
and if they really haven't changed the fabric of their organizations, right? So that, you know, we get a lot of inquiries at Morgan, at HBCU, from corporations who say, oh, we want to offer training or this or that for students or what have you. And, you know, which is great, but, you know, are recent graduates going to be placed in tracks that have, you know, upward mobility? Are students who have finance degrees going to be saddled in positions, you know, in banks where they are tellers, where they're not doing the complicated, you know, work on the other side? So on the retail side, so I guess it is, we will have to look and see if these corporations and organizations have done some really transformative and innovative work to really disrupt, you know, business as usual. Because business as usual is giving money for after school programs, which are important, but that does not contribute or yield systemic change, right? It has to be more comprehensive and deep rooted. And so, you know, I talk a lot about, you know, innovation, transformation, and disruption in my current position, but now I think that those of you who are on this call and the radical Black activists who are on the call, you know, we have to move to becoming divergent, right? Because it's very easy for movements, our work, to be co-opted, but to be divergent means that we are always, we're being self-reflective, and we are always being critical to make sure that at the heart of whatever we sign our names to, whatever we affix our energy to our names to, is geared towards liberation for Black people, which of course will not just serve Black people. It will serve Latinx people. It will serve all marginalized people, and thereby it will enhance American society, because this country will not live up to, you know, these precepts and these ideals that we hold so true unless we do right by Black people. And the country hasn't done that. And so I think this is the moment to be divergent in how we approach this work, and how we continue to examine the, you know, the ever-changing climate that we are in, and how things change so quickly, and how everything is so interrelated. So anyway, those are my 2 cents or 3 cents or 5 cents.
So someone described this as this classic struggle between those who hold power and those who claim power in order to have it shared. So what does it look like to share power? So what's an example that people can get their heads around? What does that look like?
Well, I think that if you are let's just take board representation, right? You know, oftentimes nonprofits, you know, first of all, and corporations will, you know, get their quota of Black people, you know, on their boards, but oftentimes Black people are not in positions of leadership. So I think that one, shared power means, and to use Brian Stevenson's terminology, and the terminology that was raised earlier, proximate, it means for white people to, when they are in positions of power, to step aside, because you don't always have to be in charge. White people have been in charge, are in charge of, you know, 90% of our organizations, our, you know, our political parties, you know, our educational framework, corporations, et cetera, et cetera. So step aside, let some other people lead. Recently, I saw that there was a couple of Broadway and Chicago theater groups that were, you know, touted as being like the, you know, most creative and progressive and yada, yada, yada. And then of course, after this summer, the veil was pulled back, and it was like, these are the most dysfunctional, discriminatory, racist plantations, you know, creative plantations around. And several of those directors stepped aside so that Black leadership could get in place. And so that is what we need to do. I mean, that is what needs to happen. Black people need to be, you know, leading the charge. And we need a seat at the table. That's what I'm thinking.
So with regard to philanthropy and the role of philanthropy, one of the things we talked about earlier in the discussion is around funding an additional racial disparities report. So are there other areas that philanthropy can be used in Charleston to address these disparities?
I think they should fund organizations that are doing policy work. And if there aren't organizations, Black organizations that are doing, Black think tanks, Black organizations that are doing policy work, now is the time, Audrey, LaVonda, Letitia, Tina, Darren, to start doing, you know, to focus on policy work. So I think that would be where I would put the money, and that would be what I would like to see happen. I think it is important for us to do public programs and to bring amazing thought leaders to town and all of that. But at some point, you have to move beyond that and be able to do the work that puts pressure on the legislatures and puts pressure on you know, big corporations, and puts pressure on that dysfunctional Charleston, those county school districts. And it's not just in Charleston, they're dysfunctional everywhere. So to put pressure on, you know, these organizations that, you know, are in charge of our future. Oh my goodness gracious. So that's what I think.
Mm-hmm. And as far as like updated disparities report and whatever reports we're working on right now, we've been working on Berkeley County. It's hard because, as many of you know, Berkeley County is rural, and you know, some of the FOIA requests like Panopolis or whatnot, they just won't come back. But then also, you know, we're looking at updating Charleston County, but I would tell any organization that's waiting for another disparities report to come out, you already know what it's going to say. I mean, you know what it's going to say. One of the big reasons why we did the first one after Avery, because we are a state organization and they're not going to, we are a state organization and they will not discredit the work that we did. You know, they're not going to, because then essentially there will be the municipalities will basically be discounting their selves. But the things that came out of the first disparities report are things that people in the community have been saying for years. I've been saying it for years. I get pulled over in North Charleston so many times and never got a ticket, never got a citation, never got a warning. So these are things that people in the community have been saying for years. So don't wait for another disparities report to come out, although we do need to finish another one. We do need to help build this database. So if you are philanthropists out there, help us build this database to be a national hub for disparities reports across the country. That's what we're working on. So help us. But organizations don't need to wait for another report to come out, because you know what it will say. So start making it happen now. So when the report comes out, you might be looked at in a different light, and it won't be too dark on that end again.
So question, this is a response directly from the chat. My ongoing frustration is about turning discussion into action. This example, a city of Charleston providing a budget around their commission work. Identifying, executing, and following up on a plan to make that happen needs to be completed. Who specifically takes that next step, and who tracks it to make sure it is completed and added to a master list of achieved actions?
That's big. Also, because
and Darren's on the commission.
I was appointed to the commission about a couple of weeks ago, and that's like Dr. Hussein said, getting new voices inside of the room that can push for action. One thing about me, and especially if you have emailed me before or tried to get me on the phone, I am always in a meeting. I hate meetings because I'm very action oriented. If I'm in a meeting, I want to know, all right, what's going to happen? What are we going to get out of this? I'm big on, if you're just going to have us there so we can talk about the same things over and over again, we don't need to be meeting, and we don't need to be on this commission. So one thing about that, I talked to the councilman about it before I even agreed to join it. Some true things need to come out of it. Some true actionable items need to come out of it, be it an audit of all the city departments, helping Amber do the work that she was hired to do to make that true substantive long-term systemic change, be it helping get the city of Charleston kids the resources that they need so they can be successful within this time of COVID. I will say, for me personally, I hate saying me personally, but personally, I do feel as if we're not going to get some actionable items put forward in front of council and get some resources truly put behind it, then there's no point of us having a committee at all. That's where I stand on that. But getting the new voices in the room that are tired of just talking about the same things over and over. We can't just be walking in on a 3 foot in. We need to go ahead and go to that diving board and just jump in head first. It's time. We've been doing this for 30 years, and 30 years and longer. The time is now. And we're going to talk about this with the breakout session, but I always like to bring up how in 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education, one of the key terms inside of that decision was all deliberate speed.
Mm-hmm.
Time for all deliberate speed anymore, because all deliberate speed went up to the 80s.
No, it went up to 2016 when Mississippi, a school district in Mississippi was the last school district to put in DSEG. 2016.
That is horrible.
Speed. The time is now.
No, the time was a long time ago.
Yeah, let's make this happen. I don't like all deliberate speed because you see how Charleston County, J. Arthur Brown had to take Millicent's name, take Minerva Brown's name off of the court case for Charleston desegregation and add Millicent on because Charleston was using the all deliberate speed.
Mm, mm, mm.
Any more time for all deliberate speed? It's time. We gotta work. So.
Before we get into breakouts, one last question, and then we'll get some instruction for breakouts. Do you not think racism is a bedrock of poverty?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, racism is a bedrock, I mean, of all many of our societal ills, but surely, I mean, if you think about, you know, how racism fueled the development of HUD, and then how the policies of HUD led to the breakup of, you know, Black families in the 60s and the 70s. If you think about how racism and capitalism worked in the 80s, right? When big businesses left, you know, places like the south side of Chicago, I mean, the west side of Chicago, where there were many, you know, companies, and the stockyard, the stockyard didn't go overseas, but when other big companies went overseas, and so then, you know, the people who were essential workers back then, many of whom were Black or brown, people like my parents, and their Puerto Rican and Cuban co-workers who worked on the assembly lines. There were also, you know, white folks from, you know, Eastern Europe who worked alongside of them. But when those companies left, you know, my parents and those people, of course, lost their jobs and had to reinvent themselves. But, you know, many of them were not able to, you know, maintain. And so then you have a, you know, a breakdown of families who have been able to support themselves, now very, very vulnerable. So you see how deregulation really worked and contributed to issues that then ultimately led to poverty and neighborhoods that were no longer, you know, that ended up deteriorating, that were vulnerable to drugs and gang violence. So yes to all of that, for certain. You know, they're all part and parcel to these really these insidious issues that plague us.
Right. So we're going to move into breakout sessions, and I'm going to give instructions for those. Again, I will go back to our ground rules around just working through the uncomfortableness that this may be presenting for some, not all, and also to do the work. It'll be very easy. I've been on a lot of Zoom calls as well since March, and I know that it's easy to say, I'm not going to come out for the breakout. This has been good enough. But here's the work. So we all say we got to do the work. So the work is now. So I am going to put up the instructions. So you'll be randomly assigned to breakout rooms 5 per group. Please choose amongst yourselves someone to capture the feedback on the form, or you are very willing if everybody wants to do their own form. There is questions around organization, and if you're not in the organization and you're just a single person that's participating, that's great. You can skip some of those questions, but the intent is to get as much information captured. In the chat box, you will see the link. It's a Google form so that we can actually get that information. Please discuss those questions within your group. And we've identified selected individuals to actually report out. Our time be between now and 11:30. We will reconvene at 11:30. During that time, feel free to take your bio breaks as necessary, but please participate in the breakouts. And we will reconvene at 11:30. So Ben, you can take it away. So I think we have everybody coming back in, and thank you for, we didn't lose as many people as we were expecting, so thank you for sticking through it. We're gonna move to Ben. You're gonna call out individuals to share from the breakouts.
All righty, shall we just start with the first person I've got on the list? Amber Johnson, if you're ready, I'm gonna send you, ask you to unmute right now and you can report out.
Good morning. In my group, for the first question, we discussed that our organization does not necessarily reflect our community, mostly in the upper level of management. It doesn't look like the community that they're serving. But when you look at the support staff, the lower level positions, that's more reflective of the community. The next question asked, how does your organization address systemic inequities internally and in the community? And we discussed that it's either they're not really addressing the issue, but there's some desire to do that work. It was also shared that there's some organizations are having some dialogues. For my organization, there's some financial empowerment work that's being done. And I think that's what was mentioned earlier about the Special Commission on Equity and Inclusion. The excuses that we often hear are that there's a lack of bodies, a lack of interest in those positions. They're unable to recruit. The education is not there for those positions. When we talked about performative inclusionism, we talked about, we've seen that in our hiring and asking certain people to attend certain events, being asked to be on certain committees. To move beyond that, for me, it was the creation of the commission. We talked about funding external and internal work, developing more partnerships, amplifying the voices of those who are not currently in power, and creating a direct line to the people in power. The last question that we got to is how are we implementing the racial disparities report? And I was able to share that for me, it was the development of a racial equity framework. I've started to do that work in my own personal work from that report. And I feel like that's the last question that we got to, but if there's anybody from my team, if I missed anything, please share.
So, hey Amber, peace, it's Darren. It's good to see you as always. I did want to definitely talk about one of those answers that you gave about, particularly about the lack of recruitment and education levels or whatnot. There are things that we can do with organizations to aid with that. We particularly see it at the College of Charleston a lot, but also like to say, if we're talking about CCSD, that was one of the biggest things that came out of the report. Out of the 3,000 3,000 teachers inside of CCSD, we only seen 72 of them being Black males. Well, with that, we have about 5 or 6 HBCUs within 200 miles of Charleston, and it's the city of Charleston and Charleston County. We have the people who are getting the education to fill those slots to help the students see people who look like them inside the classroom. That's when we talk about being intentional about your recruitment, being intentional about bringing those bodies in. There are ways we can do that. And then also with education, I was talking with somebody in Charleston County before, a few weeks ago, Charleston County government. What things are we putting in place to uplift those uplift that support staff that we have? So say if we, at the College of Charleston, we have facilities workers who've been in the same position for 30 years, making the same money that they've been making for the last 30 years. What are we doing as a staff member, as faculty at the college, we're able to take classes for free. Are we offering those same type of things to facilities workers, to admin assistants, to other people who work inside of support staff at the college, so they can uplift themselves and then also have upward mobility within our organizations? We see that inside of many different places. What are you doing to help uplift those people who have given their heart, time, tears, and blood, sweat, and tears to help your organization become great? What are you doing to help uplift them so they can have upward mobility within that space? So that's, I just wanted to touch on, definitely on those 2 points. Thank you for sharing.
Okay,
Yes,
go ahead.
thank you. Our next person is Ms. Cleo Brown. I'm going to unmute you, and you should be able to be heard.
We didn't get through many of the questions. The first one was, does your organizational makeup reflect the community you are serving? 2 people said definitely yes, one said pretty good, and one said a hard no. How does your organization address systemic inequities internally and in the community? Well, some of the ways were, one organization, they had started training, which was necessary for making people even aware that they had biases. Once the training was completed, they went into creating policy. And then once that policy was created, then they put in training associated with the new policies, and they created advisory groups that brought in people from all different walks of life, a lot of community engagement. There were some concerns about how COVID had slowed down some of the work that they were doing. Some people had brought in community conversations, which was addressing power and allowing people to come to the table from the community across the state who were allowed to give their ideas and their input. They asked the people what was important to them and then made the policy based on what the people said was important to them. And in another organization associated with healthcare, there is maybe just a feeling that the people in charge or management don't seem to really understand the whole issue of inequity or feel the need to do something about it. And we also had one group where they were addressing it in their newsletter monthly, and at their monthly meeting, they invited people to bring an article related to race or equity, and they discussed it as a group. Let's see. And other groups are requiring that all their employees and staff attend REI, and if you don't know that, that's Race Equity Institute. And the last thing, which is really critical, is providing training that help African Americans to move up. That too often they are put in a position and left in that position for a lifetime. Oh, you're good at that, but they don't give you the training to let you move up to the next level. And the next one was, what excuses are used when defending the lack of diversity. Oh, they say you're not qualified. There are older people in management, and so, you know, until they die, then we can do something about it after that. They don't feel that they have real barriers, so they don't do anything about it. The people who make the employment decisions are blind to the fact that they aren't doing anything in that area. People, they don't even see that they are being inequitable, not being equitable. And they don't feel that certain people fit in. They're looking for people who look like them and feel and think like them. And let's see. And if people are hired who challenge the system, they are banished in their organization. So if you are a Black person, you have to agree with the current group, or you're put out of that organization. They're saying that there are a lack of employees. So now this group is actually going to HBCUs and talking to them about being in a career in philanthropy or whatever is the group where it may seem that there are fewer people. They may not even know about that particular career. So you can do outreach to students to tell them more about your organization and what they could do there. And that's as far as we got, because we got a lot of stuff, a lot of information.
Thank you very much. Our next person.
Oh, wait a minute. Could I miss one thing, is that they, in the healthcare industry, there are only a few people in the upper management, and they just move them around and around to make it look like they've hired this person. And so that's another issue. They make it look like they're doing something when they aren't. I'm finished.
Thank you so much. Our next person to share is Miss Crystal Rouse. I'm going to unmute you right now.
Okay, thank you, and good morning. Our group, like the previous group, did not get a chance to get through all of the questions, but we did have a very deep discussion about the questions we were able to get to. Our group was comprised of individuals that represented hospitality, legal services, community organizations, other nonprofits in the school district. As far as representation, equitable representation, the overall consensus was no. And then we also got into a deeper discussion about, although some of our organizations may have equitable representation in decision-making roles, that does not necessarily mean that all of the decisions that come out of that space are going to be equitable, because not everyone at the table is about the change that needs to happen for those who are not represented at the table. So that's something we have to keep in mind. It's important to have the demographics, that they're diverse, but we also have to make sure that it's representative of grassroots level and those who are impacted the most by the decisions. As far as excuses regarding barriers, obstacles, one of the things that came out of that discussion is the fact that sometimes I think we try to do just enough. We talked about how, a lot of our organizations put out statements when different things happened here recently, although things have been happening for a long time. While putting out a statement is all well and good, we also have to make sure that the practice is coming behind that statement and actually being intentional about changes moving forward. And we also, I know Darren mentioned this earlier, every piece of healthcare, education, anything, legal aid, whatever, all of them impact each other. So most of us that were on the call were from the educational and community support realm. And with that, we have to understand that if basic needs are not met, then our children and families are not going to be responsive and perform at their best. So that's something that we have to keep in mind as well. We also talked a lot about when it comes to decision making, how we often overlook the grassroots level and community groups and organizations because they do have the feet on the ground to actually inform different things that can be put into place, different practices and policies. It was also mentioned in regards to performative inclusion, how you know, individuals are hard to find, that there have been efforts put out for recruitment. And one of the notes that I have from that is we have to be mindful of how we are choosing to communicate and do our recruitment. Because it's hard to recruit and communicate and get buy-in if there is no authentic relationship built with those entities and individuals, because people get turned off due to lack of trust. So everything that we say and do has to be with true intention. Communication is a two-way street. So what you're communicating out needs to also reflect the way that who your audience can receive and understand. I'm trying to see what else I have. I know some of the things that are put in place, of course, REI. I'll say it one more time. REI is very important for anyone in any position, if possible, throughout the city of Charleston. It's very impactful, and it's all the data is already there. We just need to act and move. Within Charleston County School District, I know they've we have implemented the Cultural Competency Committee, which is a first step into having these deeper discussions. But it was also shared that we need to take a deeper dive into that and not just look at that as a surface fix for what we're needing and what our children and families are needing as well. And then it was also mentioned that a lot of times people and organizations want to help, but they want to help on their terms, which is not beneficial to the communities and individuals that you're trying to support and impact. And that we need to stop working in silos. We have to do something different. Trust has to be rebuilt and established. Signing off for group number 8. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next person we're going to ask to share is Miss Debbie Donovan. Debbie, I'm going to ask you to unmute now.
Thank you. So I saw in the chat group that there are several people that hit submit on their form. So their answers, what they filled in, went away. And so I'm one of those people as well. But as far as our organizations reflecting the communities we served, it was an overall no, that that they do not have the diversity and makeup of the communities in which we live. As far as how we're addressing systemic inequities, one of the comments was about professional development and having those opportunities for people to get involved in, but also as far as in communities, identifying what our community is and those people that we're serving, and starting with them and focusing on them. So for example, if it's kids that we're working with, then being able to identify how can we support them, and as well as giving those people that we serve that are impacted the most by the work that we're doing, not only a voice, but a louder or loudest voice in the conversation. Barriers and obstacles, culture, history, policies, a lack of education and understanding of the systemic disparities that are ingrained in our communities, in our history, and legislative, all of those things that make it very difficult to change them, but also not really having an understanding of what's there and what it means and the impact. With performative inclusionism, the short answer was yes, that organizations have engaged in that. And I thought this was a really great conversation that we had, that it was responsibility of everybody that's involved. So if and if anybody in my group wants to speak up, by all means, please. So if I am on a committee or board or group, and we have someone that has been brought in because of the group that they represent, then making sure that if there's something that's said and it kind of gets passed over, then our responsibility to stop and make sure, like, wait, let's go back to that and make sure that they're heard. But also, if for those people that are being invited into these groups and committees because of who they represent, making sure that they're setting the expectation and the role, that if I'm going to serve on this, then this is what I'm expecting from the group. And so really setting those expectations of what you're bringing to the table and how you expect to be recognized for that. Resources, REI is one that was brought up, but also just making connections within your communities and knowing who's doing what and being able to fill in gaps where necessary. And it's really shining light on the work that's being done in the community. This has been, I'm so grateful to be here today. It's been very eye-opening for me to know exactly, more about what's being done in the community, and being able to take that back to the different organizations and associations that I'm involved in, so that I can help better educate, those folks that I work with. And like those benchmarks, just continuing the conversations and continuing creating connections and getting involved and just becoming a louder voice. I think hopefully that, this is one thing this was really great that was said in the group, was talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that it cannot be the cherry on the top of the cake, that it has to be baked in to the cake. It has to be an ingredient. It can't just be there to look pretty. It has to be part of it, or I think the words was, it's gonna fall flat.
Thank you so much. I wish we had time to hear from all of our groups. Unfortunately, we do want to be respectful of everybody's time. And so we're going to ask one more person, Margaret Seidler. I'm going to ask you to unmute and share what your group said.
Good, thank you so much. We had a fantastic group, and this was our group name. Been ready for change, down but not defeated. So one of the things that we noticed about our group is it was really across the board in terms of the organization makeup. In terms of, we had one organization in our community that has really been mindful and successful in having a diverse executives in their organization, as well as their board of directors. And it ranged all the way to where we had some diversity in a staff and not in a board. And all the way down to an organization that started out as a white organization and is still intentionally trying to diversify. I think one of the things that stood out that was said by the group was that addressing systemic inequities internally can only move as fast as their tolerance within the organization. And so it's in order to move, there needs to be a readiness, and people being ready to make a change and not just forcing a change on somebody, but thinking about how you make them ready to make the change. One of the organizations has been for years now working in systemic issues and policy issues, so was really glad to hear that. Also, in terms of resources, almost across the board, everybody knows about the Racial Equity Institute. Many have attended, and one of the organizations actually pays for their employees to attend, as well as their board members to attend REI. So I think one of the things that's happened in the last 3 years is that REI is really becoming a part of the Charleston community's fabric, and that to me is something that we can all feel good about. In terms of barriers and obstacles to people defending why they don't have diversity at the table in their organization, we really felt that that was a tough question to answer and sort of deferred that. I'll offer up my own opinions. This is not the opinion of the group. I think the excuses and barriers that I've heard across the community are that, as Darren said earlier, some people feel like they're being used as the mascot and they keep being invited to serve as the face of either the organization or themselves individually in so many different capacities. I think another real barrier is that white people who are on the nominating committees or the staffing groups have a limited knowledge of who to ask in the community that would diversify it, because quite frankly, not having relationships across the Black and white communities and Latino communities is definitely a liability for us. And then my husband served as the chair of the Trinet Tech Board for a few years, and I know that he was very specific in trying to recruit minorities to serve on that foundation board. And a lot of the responses that he got was that African Americans weren't comfortable with the commitment to have to raise funds in order to serve on the board. And that may be a cultural difference. I don't know how to dig into that, but that was one that really stood out for me. And then one wish that we had that came up about resources in your organization was a wish for the school district to do more diversity training that helps teachers understand the life and cultural experiences of their students, and that more of the teachers' focus is on connections with kids, not just the facts. And so we all still stand kind of stymied, and I'll end on this, as to why this report that is so amazing and so rooted in data has not become front and center in this community, and it's been out for 3 years. And that is something we'd like to see addressed.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think we're getting ready to wrap up. I am going to turn it over to Dr. Williams-Hussein and Mr. Calhoun for a call to action.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for thinking of me and Darren as participants, and for recognizing the work of the Race and Social Justice Initiative, and recognizing the value of the Racial Disparities Report. I think my call to action would be to look at the recommendations that we made in that report. You know, some of them, of course, may not be germane to the moment that we're in, but use it, interrogate it, use it as a way to spring forward, change it, and, you know, look to the leaders who are on the call, the organizers of this presentation today, for their insight, you know, Darren's insight in terms of the way forward. And I would also say that I would encourage you to look to Black women for leadership, because we've always been the bulwark of change in this country. And a couple people mentioned in the breakout sessions, you know, about people feeling stymied and that feeling. And I think that oftentimes the Black women that I knew and worked alongside with and found sisterhood in the struggle with, we all were suffering from the same, you know, situation, right? And so burnout, you know, being the, you know, the sort of the face for, you know, performative inclusionism, feeling like, you know, you can, you know, you're only valued for one thing. And so that speaks to the larger question of quality of life and upward mobility for Black people in Charleston County. So that's an issue. And also look to these millennials, because like I said, they are divergent and they are fearless and they have great ideas and they are on the ground. And then the call to charge to, our white allies is to really be self-reflective. Do you only bring to the table the Black people that you know or who are like you, who are like white adjacent, right? And many people thought that, thought of me as white adjacent, until they realized that I was a radical Black nationalist. And so then I was, an enigma. But so just think about, the types of Black people you bring to the table. Are you only bringing white adjacent Blacks to the table? And so what does that mean? I just say be radical and get behind the radical, the Black radical thought leaders, like these young people and the organizers of today's presentation. I really appreciate you all. Like I said, Charleston means a lot to me. My kids were basically reared there. When we got to Charleston, they said they were from Chicago. They were in first grade and third grade. Now they say they're from Charleston. I'm like, well, technically, but that's how it is. So anyway, I'm here if you all need me.
And definitely to that, what I would add would be, it touches on one of Crystal's points as well as the trust. Anytime somebody comes to me and asks me, say they want to put together a grant opportunity for, say, be it Mosquito Beach or anywhere else inside the Charleston community, the first thing I ask, who inside the community do you know? And can they vouch for you? Do they trust you? We all know about Charleston. Charleston, they won't work with you if they don't trust you. And how can you expect them to work with you if they have no idea who you are? You could just be another come here trying to take what they already have. So building up that trust, one thing Charleston loves to do is to get to the reconciliation part without getting the actual truth part to it. Let's put out the truth. Let's get that, let's build that trust, and then let's start working towards the reconciliation. Also, another action, definitely action, I'm always down for action, would be set those monthly and quarterly benchmarks to track your progress. And if you see you're not moving, then it's time to reevaluate your action items and start back over from the beginning. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of time, effort, resources, and trust building and community building to get to a place where we need to be. So again, thank you all. I appreciate every one of you for coming out. Thank you to everyone who invited us to speak. Definitely take that REI training. It's definitely needed. It's been a great program going on within the Charleston community as well as beyond. So definitely take that REI training and look out for more things that we're doing with Race and Social Justice Initiative and the Avery Research Center coming forward. Please.
Awesome.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who still stuck it out with us. I know we're just a few minutes over time, and I will not belabor this any longer. This has been fantastic. I am completely energized by this presentation, by the group of you all who participated in this. I like the common theme, and what I keep hearing is it's time for action. And that's specifically what we wanted to do with this. I mean, we have had conversations after conversations and trainings after trainings. And I saw someone said in the chat, like, we know the data, we know the reports, we know the problems. We wanted to lift up this report because, one, it has sat on the shelf for 3 years in so many ways. So we wanted to make sure we had an audience for this report to not just get read, but get investigated and to look at the recommendations. So we are committed, our organization and our partners, and I want to thank our partners, Tri-County Cradle to Career, E3, and Together SC for partnering on this conversation and many other conversations. So rest assured, we understand it's time for action. We are ready to move towards action.
And you can look forward to more from us. With our partners, we will be having future sessions on anti-racism that are focused on K through 12. We have heard, the condition of not just our school district, but just districts across the country. So we'll be investigating that from a racial equity lens. And we really feel like it's time to move towards a community-wide definition of what an anti-racist organization is. We have seen statements being put out and gestures, being made, and we see that there's value in that, but we know that it's time to take those conversations and the education and come up with a community equity plan, so to speak, as the presenters of the report have suggested that we need to develop that. So YWCA and our partners are willing to and ready to join with others, partner with you all. So you will hear from us because we do want to partner with the racial equity ecosystem, if you will. We need to identify what this ecosystem is, who's in this ecosystem, and then we want to partner together to move towards action. So I want to again thank our partners. I want to give a special shout out and thanks to Dr. Hussein and Mr. Calhoun. You guys did a fantastic job, as we knew you would, and just being candid with us and giving us that the charge and the call to action. So thank you all very much. This last slide is contact information for any of us, but of course I think you all know how to reach one of us, and if you can reach one of us, you can reach the rest of us. So thank you all again, and have a fantastic rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.